I've been asked to answer several questions, and I'll start with the politics of respectability and what is respectability. Respectability is engaging in the espousal, the articulation of views that reflect the values and ethos of a source, whether that source is um, God, one that one is serving, whom one is serving. The source could be an organization, a political party. It could be a country or a national kind of view, a worldview, views on society, views on social, economics, matters of faith, politics, history even. So it's one's acceptance of and one's articulation of those broader values in the public space. And it occurs in virtually every area of society. Politically, for instance, it occurs with African Americans on what we call the right or the conservative aspect of our politics, where you might see a Ward Connolly, for instance, and a Clarence Thomas espouse that the need for social reforms to redress structural racism, that those are no longer needed, that we have moved to a colorblind society and therefore need not have public policy reflect um, some balancing of the playing field, as others might suggest. But it happens on the right, and it also happens on the left, where you, for instance, might find a Jesse Jackson, who prior to 1960 or 1984 was against abortion, the murdering of babies. But when Jackson runs for office in '84, he now accepts and espouses what's now referred to as a woman's right to choose, a view that was very much against even the black nationalist movement that was against abortion, saw it as genocide, and certainly against the values of the church that sees life at the conception of life, even in the womb, and sees abortion as murder. So it occurs on both political ends of the spectrum. It occurs with religious community. For instance, where you might have a John Hagee several years ago began to suggest that we should nuke Iran because of public policy or because of public statements made by Ahmadinejad at the time regarding Israel. So that espoused the neocon view to expand war in the Middle East, and in this case with Iran, for views that were coming out of the office of the Prime Minister at the time. It occurs in virtually every area of society. It occurs, it could be a cultural issue, it could be society, it can come from various vantage points, but the key here is that there is no monolithic respectability, there is no monolithic politic of respectability. You may have, for instance, Hispanics that view things very different if you're looking at conservatives in Florida versus more liberal Hispanics on the West Coast. And so there's no monolithic viewpoint. It's just the evolution of views that get discussed in the public purview that reflect some source, some contingent, some views, some contingents, some broader constituency that espouses similar views. And so it can happen with Republicans, Democrats, Americans, with Africans, with Arabs that also have a worldview. So respectability is one of those things that is, it just depends on who one deems significant in that person's life, in that organization's life, in that nation's life, and reflecting those views. We can find, for instance, in our own politics, going back to Abraham Lincoln, although we've historically revised his presidency to suggest that he's freed the slaves, where in fact Abraham Lincoln during his time had very disparaging comments and views about Africans and people of African descent. He felt that colonization would have been fine, that blacks should move to Africa, that all men created equal was not a matter of African descent. It was for whites, that blacks should never have those same rights to politics and economic and social stature that was deemed for whites, that blacks could in fact not govern ourselves in the broader society space. And so, but we've kind of revised his views, so to speak, to make Abe Lincoln something that he wasn't. And similar views were held by Woodrow Wilson, who had very disparaging comments about blacks. So again, we're talking about people in their time taking on the views that were acceptable in those times. Now, people obviously change. You look at someone like George Wallace, who was governor of Alabama, that was very much a segregationist at one time, but his views changed over time. People are able to evolve, and that's the hope of humanity, that people in fact will evolve to a higher understanding, a more enlightened view that, from my vantage point, comports with things of the faith, because ultimately I believe, even in my own politics of respectability, that my source, the Lord Jesus Christ, is the source for understanding the deeper things of mankind and of spirit. And so people can evolve to these things over time, and that's the hope that we bring to the politics of respectability, that at some point they do in fact move beyond what is quote unquote acceptable